In between, we're following up on the Darlie Routiers case from last week. If you didn't get a chance to listen to last week's episode, you'll probably want to listen to it before you dive into this one. Darlie Routiers was accused and convicted of brutally murdering 2 of her 3 children and is serving a death row sentence in Texas. Her mother, sisters, ex-husband Darren, and adult son Drake do not believe she is guilty of this crime, and I have to say, based on the evidence, I've got a lot of questions about the investigation and the outcome myself. Darlie is working with the Innocence Project, and they are focusing on testing DNA found at the crime scene, allegedly. I'll update when I know more about that, but I plan to do a deep dive on this case like I did in the first season, which was about the Pamela Smart accomplice to murder trial that happened a few years before Darlie's trial. In my investigation into the murder and trial of Greg Smart and the subsequent conviction of his wife, Pam Smart, for accomplice to first-degree murder, I was able to uncover new evidence and anomalies that are currently being used to request via habeas a new hearing in Pam's case. I didn't necessarily set out to prove Pam Smart's innocence, but I did want to understand how we got here. And as I've said before, when a case doesn't sit right with me, I feel the need to unravel it and get
the way she talks right off the rip. I like the way she sounds. Sounds smart, and the Pamela Smart, I like that case.
To the why. In Darlie's case, there's so much that doesn't make sense. And I wanted to better understand where Darlie's family is coming from and why they so wholeheartedly believe in her innocence. So I reached out to Danelle, her youngest sister, and she graciously agreed to speak with me. Here's our conversation. I'll note that it is edited down in parts because Danelle and I discuss current legal processes that Darlie's lawyers don't want made public. But otherwise, it's a very candid discussion.
See, it starts with the, whenever there's a supporter, God bless this, the In Between podcast. But it's always, there's a whole lot we can't talk about. That's been for 20 years now.
Hey, Danelle, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for giving me a call back. So I just wanted to talk really briefly. I'm planning on covering Darlie's case on the podcast. You know, what I did with the Pam Smart case is I did an 8-episode deep dive, basically, on everything that happened. You know, I tried as best I could to stay unbiased about it, but obviously I have my opinions. Yeah, and the same can be said for Darlie. When I went back and revisited Pam's case and started doing the podcast, I was like, what other cases was I convinced as like a young adult of someone's guilt and not really sure now? And my immediate thought was Darlie and that experience I had with the cops and being terrified and all that stuff. You know, with Pam's case, she's the teacher who sexually assaulted her student and then convinced that kid to kill her husband. That's the sort of National Enquirer headline, right? With Darlie, I think most of the people that I know and most of the people in the public cannot tell the difference between Darlie and Susan Smith. Just a reminder, Susan Smith was convicted of murdering her 2 sons, 3-year-old Michael and 1-year-old Alexander, in 1994 by strapping the boys into their car seats and rolling her car into a lake in South Carolina. But before she was arrested and charged, she first claimed a black man, Susan and her children were white, had kidnapped her sons during a carjacking. Her defense claimed she had mental health issues, which caused her to mislead her husband, the police, and the public. She was sentenced to life in prison in 1994 and is eligible for parole. Susan Smith
just recently was denied parole. There are big differences in the cases. Susan Smith had an obvious motive. Darlie's motive was not so obvious. Susan Smith grew a conscience, and 9 days later she confessed to the crime. Darlie Routiers has not grown a conscience.
Heinous human being who did a really horrific thing, and Darlie is not Susan Smith. So the reason I wanted to sort of open up this dialogue with you is that I know Darlie can't get on the phone. I wanted to get an idea from you about where the family is in the process, because I want to report on this story, but I also don't want to skew the media either. So I want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing while she's sort of fighting for her freedom. So if you can give me an idea of where you all are and what's happening with the case, that would be super helpful.
Of course, yeah. We are really close to finding what we want to find. So that's kind of in the process. And you were also right about a fingerprint. There's not just a latent fingerprint, but also a patent fingerprint. So a fingerprint left in blood. That one is referred to as 85J. But there was also a good significant amount of fingerprints that were collected at the crime scene that were never tested, never ran, and more importantly, never turned over to the defense. So we didn't even know they existed.
Wow.
If these are new fingerprints that weren't turned over to the defense, if these are new and they were never turned over to the defense, they should have been. And if she's telling the truth, then I would have an issue if they were actually not turned over to the defense.
So those fingerprints are being processed and worked right now, kind of simultaneously as the...
Well, my thing is, if they found evidence that was not turned over, that's grounds for a mistrial without the testing. Just that on its own is grounds for a mistrial, in my opinion.
SOC is being worked on. And so we're hoping between one of those two items, we have some confirmation that will eliminate Darlie from everybody else's opinion, and then we can move forward with whatever that will look like. Okay. Ultimately, we're wanting it to end in an exoneration, and I myself am very confident that that will be the case. Yeah. But it is kind of touch and go because we have been down this road for so long. And when you know something so wholeheartedly, you know, it's hard to keep getting let down because it seems so clear to us. You know, the evidence, it is very clear to us that everything she said is supported by the evidence. Right. And so it's constantly feeling like, when's the other shoe going to drop? Or, you know, when are we going to be let down again? When are they going to tell us the next bad news or whatever? But so far, for at least the last little bit, it's been nothing but good. Really, really, really hopeful and excited about that. And we're hoping, you know, just in a matter of weeks, we'll have some kind of update. And it hurts every single time you build up your hope and you get into that place where you're preparing for good news and then
file another continuance or another fail to show up at a status conference.
Bam, they slam a door in your face and say, you know, not today.
Yeah, the justice system is very interesting, and I'm starting to understand that judges have so much power.
They really do, and there's no checks and balances. Like they say, we've got the appeal process, but in all reality, that's not checks and balances because everything is stacked in favor of the state, no matter how you look at it from the very get-go.
Absolutely,
I
understand what she's saying because it doesn't matter who you are. Let's say you can afford a decent attorney like Doug Mulder. The state does have more access to funds, procedures, expert opinion than the normal American person that stands on trial will be able to afford.
Investigation and everything involved in any of these cases is driven by the state. So they're in charge of all of it. And that really sucks because every bit of your case revolves around the evidence that they collect. And if they don't want to collect it, they don't have to collect it.
Exactly.
Well, you know, if again, I'm listening to this for the first time. If there is fingerprints that were not turned over to the defense, and you know they should have been. They should have already been tested. In my opinion, they should have been tested long ago. If this is the case.
Nobody dared to say, hey, you didn't do your job.
My interview with Danelle will continue after a quick break from our sponsors, who, along with you, dear listeners, keep my show alive. So thank you for listening. Convicted, I just think that there was a special place if you know, with Lorena Bobbitt and, you know, Mary Kay Letourneau, all these people, they were really tried. I'm not saying everybody is innocent, but most of those women were tried in the media, and their sexuality was just like the overwhelming story. You know,
well, you got to understand this too. When men are standing trial, they go into their character as well. If they have a drug problem, if they've been in trouble before, you know, how arrogant are they? Men, our character, you know, can be on trial with the crime just as quickly as a woman's. Now, the character assassination that they did with Darlie, because, you know, let me just put it this way. If there was no flaw there to draw speculation on, then her character couldn't be speculated on. What Greg Davis and Toby Shook and the rest of the prosecution team showed the jury were things that Darlie was doing. Do I believe her big boobs and the fact that she wanted a boob job had anything to do with her state of mind or murders? No, I don't. I don't. But there is some self-centeredness going on there, a little bit, you know, within her character.
Sensationalized them, made them criminally, you know, responsible for things that are not criminal. Just ridiculous. The things that were put out and the things that were twisted in all of those cases. They just pick and choose what they want for the world to know.
Well, if she, you know, again, if she said that the prosecution twisted anything that we know about Darlie's character as people that don't know her, what are they lying about? What did they lie about? Did Darlie have a male strippers in her house? Did Darlie give Zima to the underage neighbor? Was Darlie cursing at the pawn shop? Did Nelda Watts see her gleefully passing stuffed animals from the fountain with Darren? Did we not see her during the Silly String video? And even more is the graveside video afterwards, the interview that she had there. I mean, I've gone over her behavior in that interview after that. We're not going to go into that. She had every opportunity to describe what she saw, what time it was. You know, focus on the intruder because you're on the national news now. You want to find this man. We're not going to get into that, she said.
And for the most part, if you're a defendant or you're part of that defending family, you're under a gag order. So you can't even defend yourself if you want to.
Right.
You're not always under a gag order. I don't understand why, what the circumstances are that there was a gag order in the Darlie Routier case initially. I'm not sure the reason behind that. I know there was. I'd have to go back and research for a spout off my mouth about why there was a gag order, but they did violate it. Danelle was not under that gag order. That's why you'll see a video of a young Danelle giving a very heartfelt interview, which I felt so awful for her as a little, you know, as a little girl. I've seen that video a lot of times. And she cried. And she was victimized by what happened in that house that night, by no matter who perpetrated, no matter who did it. She lost her nieces, or she lost her nephews, and they were close. There's a lot of videos that you'll see of Devin and Damon, which actually is Danelle filming. I feel awful for her when I see her in that little video. And there's some other times where I felt bad for her too. You know, I give her credit for stepping up when Drake had his bout with leukemia. We all remember, Danelle stepped up. She handled her business. She took care of him. I've always given her credit. That was before I knew her as well as I do now. She's not a bad person. Nell is not a bad person. She's not. But, regardless of how I feel about her victimization, her behavior and the way she handles that is what gets her in trouble. Not only with me, with other people. She clearly maximizes this, and every time she speaks. So I haven't caught anything in it yet. She sounds very on point in this one.
Because it's always a one-sided narrative.
Did they have any other suspects, or were they just pinpointing Darlie from the beginning? Do you know?
Yeah, I do know, actually. So with Darlie's case, Rowlett was very inexperienced. They knew right away that they would need somebody to consult. And so they consulted a fellow named James Cron.
Oh, here we go, the James Cron shit. They also called in Alan Brantley. They called in Max Courtney. They called in some officers from Richardson, Texas. Come on, here she goes. This is where the lion begins.
So James Cron was a fingerprint expert. Mm-hmm. He'd been trained by the Dallas Sheriff's Department.
She minimizes. That's the only thing she'll say about him, because James Cron did say that he worked at one point in his career, they worked in the fingerprint department. And as he was in there in charge of the fingerprints, he learned some other CSI stuff. And that's where he went on to become the commander of the evidence, the crime scene. He was a lieutenant in the police department. There's a video up where, there were the 4 police officers in Dallas in 1971 are shot and killed. James Cron was the one who identified the perpetrators in that. And I put a video up. I don't know his name right away. But Dallas accidentally let him out on parole. And he shouldn't have been. James Cron's been around law enforcement for a long time. Very long time. More than somebody that lives overseas and has a degree in forensics and criminology and sociology that lives overseas, that comes on Rich's panel and doesn't work in the field.
And his role at the Dallas Sheriff's Department was the lieutenant of the evidence locker and basically the keeper of the fingerprint.
There's a proof that James Cron, as a lieutenant, as a detective, covered crime cases from at least 1971 on my channel. She minimizes the man's qualifications.
Is what the lawyers called him. So he was not a crime scene investigator.
Oh my God, she's going to take it away from him. And she knows she's lying. Just in my YouTube search bar, just type in James Cron. I list his plethora of qualifications. Now, James Cron was paid to go in and give what he felt about the case. There have been times where these crime scene experts go in and look at crime scenes, and the jury does not agree with them. It made so much sense that the jury agreed. Even Darlie herself, I have posted in the Darlie Routier War Room, just a few posts down, the writ that Darlie does not challenge the evidence in her case. She's not challenged. She's never challenged the evidence. It's the people out here. Darlie just wants out on a technicality. Anything that can get her out.
He was not a police officer.
He was not a police officer. He was a lieutenant. They don't give the role lieutenant to civilians or commander. This is where I do not feel sorry for this Danelle.
He was a civilian employee of Dallas Sheriff's Department. Yeah. Okay. And Rowlett felt like it was appropriate to consult him. he had a relationship already with some of those. I don't think it was the chief so much as it was some of the lieutenants at the Raleigh Police Department. They were buddies, and I guess had done some training with him on.
That's because James Cron taught crime scene investigation throughout the country as an instructor. That doesn't make you buddy-buddy. They're like, oh, we know him. We were in his class. Let's get him. He can teach it. He can show it. James Cron had the qualifications to walk into 5801 Eagle Drive and take a look at what he saw. And like I said, his initial, within the first few minutes, in any situation as a human being, when you come across a scenario, you'll get a first intuition about something. And so the first thing to come to his mind was, this just doesn't, it looks like an inside job. And where was he wrong in that? Because to this day, it looks like an inside job. That was his gut feeling. He did not get tripped up on the stand at all.
Fingerprints for some of their newer officers. And so when they called him, he agreed. He showed up. And so the crime happened at 2:30 in the morning. He was there by 5:30 in the morning.
He got there at 6:30. And she could say 5:30. They could say 5:30, whatever they want. But Pam saw where I corresponded with Cron through email. He said, pardon my brevity, but I cannot speak much more on this case as she is under appeal. But he answered a couple questions, and that's just they don't want the legality of it.
And by 6 a.m., they had only done a walkthrough that consisted of 20 to 25 minutes, I think is what he said.
He said 20, 25 minutes. And notice she's saying they. They did a walkthrough.
And at the end of his, we're going to use air quotes here, investigation,
yeah,
he laid out.
Well, he wasn't at the end of his investigation. When you walk through and you do an initial walkthrough, that's the beginning of your investigation. So your initial investigation, so he wasn't complete. It wasn't complete. So he, not in 30 minutes. He worked that scene all the way up until November.
The scenario that I think his exact words were, there was no intruders here, or there was not an intruder here, something along those lines. So that was all the Raleigh Police Department.
I believe he said he felt like it was an inside job. And from the scene and the story that Darlie gave, you just take James Cron completely out of. Let's say James Cron's not the one that honed in on it first. The Raleigh Police Department, the FBI, the other CSIs, the trained detectives, the doctors, they didn't need James Cron to see what they saw and know what they know. James Cron didn't go in and say, you know what? I think Darlie did this, and everybody fucking believed him. Because if it looked to me for 1 second like Darlie didn't do that, I would say, fuck you, you're lying, she's innocent. They didn't need James Cron for that. That's what you try to blame this all. Well, he's the one that started it. He started it. No. The investigators that were around Darlie, the people that spoke to Darlie, she was off to them too. Even the doctors and the nurses that treated her said that she had a flat effect. Dr. Santos said he had never seen a woman act that way that had just lost children with that flat effect. James Cron had nothing to do with that. It was James Cron. First it was James Cron that blamed on her, and then it was Greg Davis that lied some more, right?
Department needed. Right. Because clearly he's better at this than they are, and he's more educated, and he
is with all of his experience. Yes, that's why they called him. That's why he made a living as a crime scene consultant. He wouldn't be able to do it if he wasn't any good at it.
They're going to trust whatever he says.
No, they're not going to trust whatever he says. They will challenge him. That's not the end story.
And he planted the seed without even having evidence collected. Like they hadn't even done anything.
He didn't say Darlie did this after 20 minutes. They want to just harp on this so much. Like I said, he walked into the scene. He knew a little bit about what happened. He took a look around, and it didn't look like there was hardly any damage. The table flipped over. Cut screen. Test all the knives. Test all the shoes. Find out whose footprint that is. He said, but he started out with intuition that told him that this was an inside job. And he was not wrong in that. Look at us today.
At the crime scene. Only walked through it. They had secured it and walked through it, and that was it. And majority of the evidence that they ended up collecting that they used against Darlie was actually just contamination. And I don't know of one single piece of evidence that can't be explained away as contamination. It all kind of falls into that category.
Well, it would have to be. So remember, everything is contaminated. Even the evidence that you present that looks good for Darlie's innocent side, well, it's contaminated. Fuck out of here. Can't pick and choose.
Category. So it really was based on James Cron's opinion at 6.
It was not based on James Cron's opinion. James Cron had absolutely nothing to do with what took place when Jimmy Patterson and Detective Frosch interviewed her, or when Bill Parker spoke to her, which I don't give him any credit. But James Cron had nothing to do with that. He just said, this looks like an inside job. And he was probably just going on what was the obvious as soon as he walked in. She wants everybody to believe that everybody thinks Darlie did this. Because James Cron's intuition 25 minutes into walking into that scene over there was that this was an inside job. You know what? Fuck, Darlie did it. That's not what he said.
6 o'clock in the morning, that there was no intruder. And from that moment on, they never looked outside of Darlie. It was completely focused on Darlie from 6 a.m. on June 6th.
Now, you have Darlie already, okay, so Darlie's acting weird in the hospital. The nursing staff is noticing it. They had to question Darlie. They had to question Darren. Darren seemed solid to them, and Darlie seemed kind of off to the police, just like she seemed kind of off to the medical staff. So that raises a fucking eyebrow right there when you have a murderer. So they needed to talk to Darlie more because she's the only living witness as to what happened in that room. So they absolutely had to ask her. And Darlie's stories were not consistent.
Forward. So just recently, I'm going to say 6 months ago or so, I started doing some research, just kind of, just re-looking at things in her case. And I started calling some of the people that had called in leads as early as the 7th. And those individuals, when I was able to get in contact with them, they told us that their lead was basically brushed away, and they were told that they had it figured out. And the lady that called on the 8th and said she'd seen a suspicious car was told, don't worry about it. We already have it solved.
Yeah, I do remember that one. I remember hearing about the car. And then there was something else about the business, too, wasn't there?
Well, the thing with the car, that's very weak to me. Let me tell you why. Lots of people saw this car. Has several different people that saw this car. What kind of car was it? Could it just be a random person that's passing through the area? There's lots of houses there. Could be a visitor that was driving down there and they slowed down and said, that's a nice fountain. Just, the answer to the whole suspicious thing about the car is, what kind of car was it? And that's what the police had to go on.
So Darren worked next to a man that had done some insurance fraud in the past, and Darren had.
She says that he had done some insurance fraud in the past, with no evidence of it.
Had conversations with him about insurance fraud and maybe having the house robbed. I don't know if that may be what you're referring to. There wasn't really, so that wasn't called in, and we didn't even know about that until maybe 3 or 4 years later. My stepdad had some guys that worked for him that, he paid just cash. They were like day labor. And Darren had thought maybe my stepdad would know somebody.
She minimized and said it was like 3 years later, but actually, I believe those affidavits came out in 2002. Right around her appeals time, Robbie Jean Key wrote one saying that Darren asked him, hey, you know anybody who robbed my house? I mean, because that's what I would do. If I was a shitty son-in-law that's just up to no good, I'd show everybody what a piece of shit I am by asking my dad, my father-in-law, to help me commit a crime. No, this is a story that they made up.
That could set his house up for a robbery, and then he'd claim insurance, and he would get all of his belongings back, and then he would just pay them from the insurance, whatever he collected.
Right.
Okay, what belongings? Now, let's go through this again. The whole insurance scam. That is just to throw you off. That is a scheme between all of them that are involved in it to cast reasonable doubt for Darlie. Right? So, Darren's talking to multiple people. Darren never names these people. He leaves it up to Donnell and all them to name Barry Fife. Because it's not the truth. All right? I don't understand this, that she keeps on with the same shit.
And Darren did admit to having those conversations, but he never planned anything. It was never, my stepdad told him, nope, I don't know anybody that would do that for you.
Yeah, I mean, they were having some financial difficulties.
The stepfather, Robbie Jean Key, is also a convicted of grand theft in 1991. A stolen pickup truck was found on his property, by the way.
Difficulties, but that's not enough of a motive for Darlie to hurt her children.
And really, I would say that the financial angle was really kind of exploited. It was blown into something bigger than what it was. Darren had $120,000 in receivables due to him. So they weren't broke,
right.
But anytime you're self-employed.
Okay, so where did that $120,000 in receivables go to? Because Darren lost his house. And she went from having Doug Mulder, which was around $200,000, to having a public defender. And at the whole time, Darlie Key is telling us that her family gave up their college funds, mortgaged their houses, and to get an attorney, and they didn't even pay him the entire $200,000. So where'd that money go, Darren?
You'd kind of have to wait on that cash flow to come in. And
tell me about it.
While they weren't fixing to go into foreclosure. Their house was current on its bills. They had been late on their last 2 house payments, but it had.
She minimizes the fact that they were behind on the house payment.
been caught up and it was squared away. They were not at risk of foreclosure. They didn't have any crazy, huge financial debts outside of what their assets were. Mm-hmm. So the financial hardships, they were 26 and 27 years old.
So young. Yeah.
Yeah. Who at that age is really financially stable in a place where they don't worry about money? Like, I really don't know anybody outside of people that are born wealthy. And Darlie and Darren both they were not born rich. Mm-hmm. They worked really hard for their money. And so they were really enjoying what they were earning.
Yeah.
And everybody was taken care of. They were providing for more than just their own family. So it was, in my opinion, they were successful in their business endeavors. And yes, they did like to enjoy their money, but financially it was not dire straits like the picture was painted. So, and even if they were, Darren had $800,000 in life insurance. Darlie had $500,000 in life insurance. The boys had rider policies that just came with the life insurance they bought, and it was $5,000 each. So it was not even enough to cover their burial. We still were out of pocket.
Yeah, most of us that believe that Darlie is guilty, we don't believe that she did it for the money.
Get almost $3,000 to bury our boys.
Do you think that the defense made a good enough argument for her, or she could have had a better defense?
I think that we were really shortchanged with our defense. I think they tried as hard as they could, but it was shut down every time they requested something.
By facts. There was nothing that the defense was not allowed to present. Nothing. She's a liar.
It was an immediate denial. Okay. They had asked to have the trial moved out of Kerrville because that was such a conservative area, and we knew that was going to be bad for the case, and he refused because the judge had a retirement home in Kerrville. And
oh my God, here we go. Boo-hoo. They already filed a motion to change the venue. That's why if I don't recall them filing to have it moved out of Kerrville. Please put that in the comments below if you know that. I don't recall them filing to have a motion to have it sent back to Dallas, but I seem to remember something of that. The judge would simply deny it because they've already spent the money to move it once. Oh, he had real estate there, so, the judge, this time first it was James Cron who wasn't a real investigator. All right, he's the one pouring, he blamed her. Now the judge wouldn't get him away from that conservative Kerrville. They're going to find her guilty because they're so conservative. Most of the people that are in Kerrville are from somewhere else. If you look at it now, let's show me what conservative is. Go take a look at the city of Kerrville. And it doesn't help her case much when she speaks on the citizens of Kerrville and their mindset when her attorney, Richard Mosty, was born and raised there.
Planned to retire there.
Right.
So it didn't matter if that was going to be a fair place for Darlie or not. It was convenient for him. So that was shut down immediately. No, you cannot have a change of venue.
Well, first they said Dallas wasn't fair. Now they're going to say Kerrville wasn't fair. Then when they're going to put her somewhere else, and that's not fair too? Not fair for Darlie. These people around here, they don't like her. The jury of her peers. Okay, because if you want to talk about conservative and, woodsy people back, country folks, Darlie's actually from Altoona, Pennsylvania. So you match that up with Kerrville and get back with me.
And then we asked for a extension because we had changed counsel. It went from Doug Parks, who was court appointed and actually was really doing a fantastic job. We just didn't.
Doug Parks actually wanted to blame Darren. Doug Parks also was the one who filed to have a polygraph test done unbeknownst to the prosecution, and the state paid for it. Doug Parks believed that Darren did it.
No, that
You know why? Because to him, the evidence that he saw showed him that there was no intruder in that house. Doug Parks believed Darren did it. That's why I was a Darlie Routiers supporter.
Right.
the defense gets denied everything no matter who you are. So we just felt like he was being denied everything he asked for, so maybe we need.
He was being denied everything he asked for, but he arranged to have a polygraph test done in secret. And the state paid for 6 hours of the polygraph examiner's time and the testing at a cost of $1,000.
Need somebody bigger and stronger and better and more impactful, and Doug Mulder became her lawyer, and again we were refused on everything we requested. So Doug Mulder ended up having something like 6 or 8 weeks to prepare for a
No, Doug Mulder, like I said, he took, when you see him standing in the Kerrville saying, well, I can't get on it right now after October, because I have prior commitments. His prior commitments was that he was going to Hawaii.
death penalty case. And from start to finish, it was only like 7 months, 6 or 7.
And the speed of the trials, the speed of the right to the speedy trial, it's all moved along by the defense. It is. It's not something that the prosecution is in control of.
7 months was the time frame they had to prepare for this trial. We were still getting results from testing the day the trial opened. Like the first day of trial, they were still having results come in from testing. So it was very much rushed, and our lawyers were not prepared. Doug Mulder really was
The lawyers weren't prepared. The judge didn't want to help move him. Poor Darlie. James Cron. The blame game.
Excellent lawyer, but he thought that he was, I guess, persuasive enough or charismatic enough that he could handle the state's experts on cross-examination. And in reality, he did do a really good job of pointing out the error.
The state's experts had better evidence, you dipshit. Mulder tried sensationalizing the trial by having the two officers put into a corner to where they would plead the Fifth Amendment on speaking about them being accused of this crime. That was one tactic.
And the flaws in both the fiber expert and James Cron, the consultant, and with Tom Bevel, the blood spatter expert. He did a great job of kind of showing where the flaws were in their testimony, but we never put anybody on the stand to represent a different view. We just disputed what the other side said. And I don't know if that was because we were paying Doug Mulder and he was already dipping into his profits to defend Darlie, and that lawyers like to make money, and he knew that there probably wasn't going to.
Attorney's fees are not deducted for testing. If Doug Mulder says I need $200,000, when testing comes about, he's going to say, I need that money for that testing too. It doesn't come out of the lawyer's fee testing. The lawyer will come to you and say, hey, we need to get this testing done, so you need to raise this much money.
To be a lot of money to be made on that trial. So he would have had to have paid for the experts out of that $100,000 retainer that we'd given him, and he just didn't do that for whatever reason.
I feel like most of the cases,
it's his money. That's his earning.
hinge on experts, and they're so expensive, and most of the defenses cannot afford them.
You think that we have, as a layperson that doesn't have any reference of the justice system, you think that it's set up fairly because that's what we've been taught our whole life. And in reality, there's absolutely nothing fair about it. It's so stacked against whoever the defendant is that you almost have to present an alternate person. Otherwise, you're not going to to walk away. You're going to go to jail no matter what the crime might be.
Yeah, that's why I asked if
painful.
there was. That's why I asked if.
They want to talk about how many people, are done wrong by the system. You have a lot of guilty people that deserve it. You have innocent people. But you also have people that go to court and they didn't commit the crime and they're found innocent. Usually it just depends on what they have against you.
If there were any other suspects that the defense could have, shown that there was any sort of alternative suspect in the case, but it doesn't seem like there was. So what do you...
They never looked for any. Now, we have investigated this case to the bone. Like, we've exhausted all of our resources trying to kind of dig into every possible avenue. And there is several that very well could have been involved or would have been really good leads to check up on and would have been so simple to investigate. Like back then, things were real life and real time. And now, we're looking at things 10, 20, 30 years later, and it's hard to track those people down. Memories are faded. People are dead. Things have changed. And so the investigative side on the back end has been really difficult. And it would have been so much easier had they done it the right way the first time around.
My interview with Danelle will continue after a quick break from our sponsors, who, along with you, dear listeners, keep my show alive. So thank you for listening.
They investigated to support their theory. They didn't let the evidence tell the story. They told the story they wanted it to say.
That means, they made the evidence against Darlie become evidence against Darlie. And everybody that's stood firm on her conviction, the courts, the jurors, the people who know she's guilty, come on. If the evidence wasn't there, I mean, we don't want her to be guilty. She just is.
I think that happens more often than not, unfortunately.
Absolutely, it does.
So what do you think it was? Do you think there was one specific thing that convicted Darlie, or was it public sentiment, the news media? What was it?
I think the biggest part was the media painted her as such a villain that she walked into that courtroom with the jury thinking that she was a monster from the time they sat in those chairs. One of the jury members said that all that she knew about the case was that she was a blonde from Dallas with big boobs that killed her kids.
Yeah.
The media, did they media paint her the silly string party? And let's take the whole celebration of it and give you the benefit of the doubt. Yes, that's the way that you celebrated Devin's life. But the interview afterwards, gossip is the biggest evil in the world. And we're not going to get into that right now.
And that was all she knew about the case. Well, that is a bias from day one. Like that's the opposite of what you want for a jury. But unfortunately, again, we really couldn't do anything about it. Where our jury pool was not the same as Darlie. They were small town. Majority of them were not very educated. And they lived in a very conservative area where Darlie lived in Dallas, where everybody had breast implants and everybody dyed their...
Small town dumbasses. I grew up in the Texas area, and I don't know anybody that had the breasts done. The breasts. But the breasts didn't get her convicted.
Hair, and everybody was, flamboyant.
See, a bunch of dumbasses that people aren't educated, so Darlie's innocent. It's a jury of her peers. One of the jurors had worked for 40-some years at the Kerrville Hospital for the Mentally Insane.
Beautiful, and if you weren't, then...
Two of them were stay-at-home moms.
You didn't fit in.
Yeah, you're in Dallas County, and it was the late 90s.
Yeah, big hair and fancy jewelry was really popular then. But those things didn't go without the boys were spoiled just like Darlie was. And it was Darren that liked to spoil Darlie, and Darlie liked to spoil the boys. And we definitely were judged tremendously based on their purchases and what they did with their free time and how they lived their life. And reality, looking back, they lived a very normal life. And if you look at the dirt they found on Darlie, she was a fucking saint.
Right.
I mean, at 26 or 27 years old, most people don't have such a clean life.
Well, before all this happened, it
ridiculous.
sounds like she was actually an amazing mother, and she took care of other kids.
I didn't go into
and she
depth
was a
about
good
the
neighbor
silly string
and all
video in
that.
the Cliff Notes
Can you talk
episode of
to me
this
about the
case.
silly
So
string
for
video?
those of you
Because
who
I
are not
just- I
familiar,
can't
a
believe-
video
I feel
captured
like
by the
that's what
local
she was
news
convicted
media
of.
was released right after the memorial for the boys that showed Darlie and her family celebrating with silly string around the gravesite. Not a great look. But was it evidence that she murdered her boys? Was it enough evidence to convict her? And finally, was there more to the video than the prosecution showed the jury? Danelle.
Oh, no, here we go. There's not more to the video that the prosecution showed the jury. There's not. Oh.
Says yes. You be the judge.
It definitely was a huge part of it. And the jury said that they watched that anywhere from 7 to 9 times in their deliberations. So we know that
They watched it 8 times. You don't 7 to 9. When you start to watch it the 8th time and stop, and you're almost 9. They just couldn't believe what they were seeing.
that made a huge impact on the determination for Darlie's guilt or innocence.
You can see Rena Way on the Lisa Gibbons show tell you, let's take the silly string out of the equation. That's not what convicted her, but it didn't look good. Especially when there's other stuff that didn't look good.
Now, what was not presented and not even discussed, I don't even think it was talked about, was that whole scenario was the idea of a 16-year-old. So my other sister was planning a wedding. Her and Darlie.
Again, blaming on somebody else. She couldn't get the, it was James Cron blamed for his intuition. The judge blamed for, let's move it here because these people aren't fair. And let's move it here because these people won't be fair. And let's move it's now. Well, it wasn't even Darlie's idea. It wasn't even Darlie's idea. But see, it's Darlie's finger that you see on that silly string can. Chewing that gum. Not Dana's.
Darlie was going to renew her vows and Dana was going to have a wedding and in this next year. So they were planning things and it kind of consumed their free time and they were talking about the details. And the boys, Devin and Damon, had asked if they could spray silly string whenever they walked down the aisle to leave instead of throwing rice. And, Dana and Darlie thought about it and decided with white dresses that colored silly string probably would stain the dresses. And so we'll wait and we'll save the silly string for something else. And Dana had promised Devin, the oldest, that they would do silly string at his birthday party, which was coming up.
Right.
Well, he didn't live to see that. And that really weighed on Dana. And as a 16-year-old, you're still a child. And we don't know how to grieve. We weren't prepared who is prepared to lose a child when you're a child yourself?
Let alone 2 children.
So,
yeah,
in such a brutal way. So it was really hard for Dana. And that just really weighed on her that she never got to do this.
Fault. The silly string was Dana's fault.
Silly string with them, and so she bought silly string on her own and brought it to the memorial. And
on her own, nobody told her to.
They had already sent out invitations for Devin's birthday party, and so instead of calling all these kids individually and telling them we're not going to have a birthday party, they donated all of the gifts from the birthday party. If they had already bought gifts, they brought them and we donated them to a children's house in Rowlett that Darlie had done some work with in the past. So it was in good intentions and it was to honor little boys. And that was all Devin could talk about for, like 2-3 weeks prior to was his upcoming birthday was that next weekend. We were going to have a swimming party, and it was, how many more days till my birthday? When do I get to turn 7? And, that kind of thing. And so it felt like that was what we were supposed to do. We were supposed to honor Devin. And that's how a child, Dana was 16. She felt like that would honor them. Yeah. And we did it because it felt right in the moment. And we just really had no idea how that would be shown to the media and how it would be perceived.
Why? You had the media standing right there with the camera facing right at you. How would you not know that was being shown to the media?
And they just chewed it up and spit us out, and it looked awful. But they never talked about the 2 to 4 hours before that, where we did have a memorial. We did pray. We were crying. We were,
There's only a video of Darlie sitting down on the ground while everyone else has their heads down. They're praying. But Darlie's sitting on the ground playing with the baby.
Having that kind of a somber, grieving moments with the pastor at the gravesite, and consoling each other and hugging and all of that. Yeah. And so when you get to a certain point, you kind of, for a lack of better words, you run out of tears. And that's kind of where we were at. We'd been crying for like 10 days straight. And it was just so emotionally draining that you just get to a point where you're kind of numb and you don't have any feelings. And I think everybody except for me was medicated at that point because of the amount of anxiety and stress and trauma that everybody had gone through. Yeah. And so reality was that we really were kind of numbed by medications and everything that was going on. We were just in shock. And I also think that a big part of that was we were confident that Rowlett was going to solve this. And they had stopped us. They'd asked us if we could meet them prior to the memorial. And so we stopped at a Home Depot parking lot, and Jimmy Patterson met us there. And he, I don't remember, I think he was getting something or returning something to Darlie. And we all got out of the car. I was standing right beside Darlie. Darren was right beside him. And Jimmy Patterson, I can see it to this day. He looked at them and said, we got him. We've got we've got DNA underneath your fingernails. And so we're going to be able to solve this case. Wow. Well, we were just ecstatic. We didn't know anything about DNA. As a 13-year-old child.
That's another reason why Darlie silly string party looked so relieved. Just before she got to the silly string party, she was told, well, we've got DNA under your nails. She's thinking they take this to somebody else. Because if they would think, if she'd think about it, Darlie not at one time said she made contact with the intruder. Jimmy Patterson is allowed to lie. Police are allowed to lie. He's probably looking for a reaction. And we all saw that reaction at the silly string party to that good news.
You kind of think, oh, that means they'll know his name. Well, that's not how DNA works. And there really wasn't any DNA, as best as we know. Nothing was ever collected from Darlie's fingernails. And that was just a bold-faced lie to hopefully give us some false hope, I guess. I don't really know what his motive was.
He was looking for a reaction. And like I said, he knew that urn that you were getting ready to go in front of was bugged. He was looking for a reaction. We all got to see that reaction. Things that make you go,
But they knew we were doing the birthday party. He gave us that information. We were confident they were going to solve this case. And so we felt a little bit of relief and confidence in their abilities. And that was so false. We were just completely lied to. And like the wool was pulled right over our eyes. They were the wolf in sheep's clothing. We thought they were protecting us, and they were really digging our graves.
Wow. I've never heard about that, obviously, but that happened right before the memorial or after?
No, that was on our way to the memorial. So we stopped before we got there. Yeah, that was fresh news. Like, we hadn't even shared that information with the rest of the family yet. I think we shared it with them once we got to the memorial. And so, again, we had that relief that, all right, they're going to find them. I mean, DNA, certainly they'll be able to just plug in that information and it'll generate a name, and then we'll arrest him and he'll go to jail and it'll be solved. And that is not how that works at all.
So you were 13 at the time, is that right? Or 16?
Yes.
You were 13 and then your sister was 16.
Correct.
So the night that it happened, or I guess it would be the morning at this point, and Darlie is going into surgery. What did you all gather at the hospital? What was happening that morning?
Yes. So, with my mother got a call from the neighbor, and the neighbor told my mom, like 3 o'clock in the morning. Actually, it might have been before 3 o'clock in the morning. It was probably like, 2:40. And she said, there's been an incident. Somebody broke into Darlie's house. The boys are dead, and Darlie will probably not survive either.
Jeez.
And that was coming from a nurse that lived across the street that had seen Darlie's injuries. She'd seen the boys. She actually walked into the crime scene and saw a lot of what was going on. So she was very pessimistic that Darlie would even survive. And
this is when they talk about Karen Neal going into the crime scene to see the boys and seeing Darlie, and she saw all the carnage, and she's a nurse. But they never say anything about her possibly contaminating the crime scene by walking in there. They never say anything, well, why didn't Karen Neal have on booties? Because Karen Neal going into the crime scene to give her story, it benefits it's uplifting for Darlie. So it's okay that she went in there, but everybody else, they contaminated it. Not her, though. No, not her.
So my mother jumped in the car and drove to the crime scene and waited outside until somebody directed her and said, go to Dallas. And so that my mom went to, actually, I think her best friend drove her to Baylor, Dallas, and she waited to get an update. And they told her Darlie was still alive and that she was going into emergency surgery. And
emergency surgery. There's the lie. It was exploratory surgery. They wanted to check the vessels in her neck to be sure that she didn't hit the main artery. It was exploratory. It was not emergency. Bam.
We didn't get to see her till, I want to say it was almost 8 in the morning before we got to see her. But I didn't even know anything was going on. I actually was at one of my very best friend's houses, and her mother came and woke us up probably about 7:30 that morning and said, your mom called. She said the boys are at the hospital and she wants for me to bring you to the hospital. Well, I think it was 2 nights before I had been over there, and the boys had a rash, and we were thinking maybe they had chicken pox. Maybe that's why. I mean, I was a child. I had no idea. Right. So I thought they were going to the hospital because they had chicken pox. And so she drove us there. And I remember we stopped and got breakfast. The radio was on, and kind of a update came through the radio. Like, the radio host started talking and she immediately turned off the radio. And I thought, that's weird. And then she was asking us questions about, what we were going to do and what was the night before like, because it was a birthday party, and just, little conversation to distract us. Mm-hmm. And whenever we got to Baylor Hospital, she walked me to the front of the emergency room. And I remember walking through the emergency room and seeing familiar faces and thinking, that person looks so familiar to me, but I couldn't really place their face. And then we walked through the double doors where the trauma area was, and my mom was kind of standing in the corner, and she kind of put me in a corner and looked at me and said, I have some really bad news. Somebody broke into Darlie's house, and the boys were killed, and Darlie was attacked, and we don't know if Darlie's going to survive. And I remember hearing the words, and I remember thinking, absolutely not. Like, are you kidding me? That's not possible. And And then the next thing I know, we're sitting on the floor in the emergency room, kind of just sobbing, like we weren't even speaking. It was just tears and tears and tears. And there was people kind of gathered around us, I guess really making kind of a shield so we weren't on display for the rest of the world to see, and patting our backs and whatnot. And so they kind of scooped us up off the floor and put us into the family room, which is a really bad room. That if you have to go to the family room, it's usually bad news. And so we waited in there and we prayed, and Darren's cousin was a pastor, and I remember him praying, and I remember feeling a sense of calm. It was kind of a weird, like, it's going to be okay. Whatever this is, it's going to be okay. And then we just lived at the hospital for like the next 48 hours until they released her. And from that point moving forward, it's all just kind of a blur. You know, we were doing whatever we could to accommodate the investigation. And if they said jump, we said how high. And at one point, one of Darren's friends said, you know, I'm kind of concerned. I think you, based on what he was seeing in the media, he had suggested we get a lawyer. And Darren and Darlie dug their heels in and said, no, innocent people don't need lawyers. And it was the biggest mistake of our life.
Yeah. Well, I know that that's a tough question to answer, and I appreciate you being.
You sure did get a lawyer. They got one of the most expensive in that area, because innocent people don't need lawyers.
You know, your candor. I also imagine the sort of juxtaposition between the devastation of losing Devin and Damon, and then sort of the elation the next morning when Darlie made it through. You must have been struggling with your emotions. Your family must have just been going through it. I can't even imagine.
It is such a mix of emotion. It really is.
Yeah. And then to, you know, feel like you know, Darlie's okay at least out of this, and then the police are, you know, immediately coming after her. It's awful. I'm so sorry that happened.
It sucked. That's no doubt.
My interview with Danelle will continue after a quick break from our sponsors, who, along with you, dear listeners, keep my show alive.
I know that Darren and Darlie have divorced, but I also know that Darren is, you know, believes in her innocence. Is your family still in communication or connection with Darren? I would assume so, because he has Drake. Is that correct?
Well, Drake is a grown man now, so he is completely independent. And I actually had Drake for a few years when he was graduating high school. Yeah, he moved in with us right before his senior year, and we got him through his senior year. And then when he graduated, he moved back to Lubbock before he decided what he wanted to do with the rest of his life. So he's grown and living independently, and Darren is still around. I talk to him, not weekly, but regularly. I talk to Darren. So I was so young when he became part of my life that I don't remember life without him. So he feels like an extension of Darlie to me. And I've always kind of kept that relationship. I saw them go through this together, and I know that Darren has a good heart, and that, in my opinion, there was not anything that he knowingly or willingly did that could have contributed to this. And his life was destroyed just like Darlie's was.
See, so they're basically telling you that whole asking people to break into the house, I don't believe he knowingly did anything to have anything to do with this. But they'll bring it up that he was asking people, but later on she'll take it back. Because if you're asking people to break in your house for insurance money, you've knowingly done something to put your house in harm. This is what I was going to say earlier, and I lost my train of thought about the whole insurance scam situation, and the fact that, you know, people want you to believe that Darren caused some people to come over. They want you to speculate. They want it to sit in the back of your head that Darren could have said this stuff and caused some people to have overheard him saying, I want somebody to break in my house. And took it upon themselves to come to his house at 2:30 in the morning with no vehicle, with no way of moving the stuff. What stuff? That's what I was going to say earlier, and I lost my train of thought on it. She said that you go in and get Darren's objects and hide them, and he'll get the insurance money, get his objects back, and he'll pay you. What are you talking about taking out of that house? That's going to be a big insurance payoff. What did he have in there? Think about it. Because Darlie had several $1,000s worth of jewelry laying right there in the path of the intruder. But Danelle will tell you that the intruder could not see them. They were not in his direct path because there were 2-liter bottles of Pepsi, 2-liter bottles sitting right there on the counter. And you can look at the pictures and see that that's a damn lie. They are sitting on the counter, but they ain't covered. So these people are just going to take it upon themselves to show up there with no way to take anything out, and then say, you know what? First of all, they didn't talk to Darren. They just overheard him. And Barry Fife. Barry Fife, yeah. Barry Fife did that. He pulled up there. He didn't have a truck or anything. They climbed in the back. Well, how was he supposed to get the stuff out of the house for an insurance scam? They know it's bullshit. They know that's bullshit. She just said, Darren in no way did anything. They know that damn scam is that's a lie.
Yeah.
I mean, he may be a free man, but he'll never be free,
Right.
So he is a good man. We still do communicate, and he does still support Darlie 100% in her innocence. And I would say that they don't communicate actively, but I would say they're still friendly. He would do whatever he needed if he needed to do something to help Darlie, he would do it.
And I know this is a tough question, but the last that I heard, Drake had been diagnosed with cancer. How is he doing?
Complete remission.
Oh,
so yeah, that was kind of a God thing. At that point, I was the only medically trained person in the family. And I had been talking to Drake about coming and staying with us for his senior year, and convinced him to move down to where we lived in Wills Point. And he moved in, and 2 weeks later, we took him to Children's Hospital, and he was diagnosed with leukemia. And it was really kind of like scary. I mean, obviously it was scary, but it was close. Had he not moved in with us, I don't know what the outcome would have been, because it would have progressed faster than we could have treated. So it was a blessing that he moved in with us. He went through the entire treatment, 2 years of pretty intensive treatments, and then 5 years was the span that you really watch for. And he's outside of that 5-year window and has had no further recurrence. And he does have some lingering neuropathy in his feet from the chemotherapy, but we'll take it. Yeah. That's definitely a fair trade.
And
I always gave Danelle props for taking Drake on before the huge amount of fighting that went on between us, behind the scenes that I didn't say publicly. I was like, that's a good person that she took him on and was there for him. We've always appreciated that from Danelle.
He is communicating with Darlie. They've communicated his whole life. Yeah, that's what.
Yeah. He still loves his mommy very much, and that's all he's ever known is this life. And I call him my little Harry Potter because he's so resilient. And we have not treated him like Harry Potter, but he is just so persistent at being happy, and he tries very hard to stay on the positive side of things, and it can be hard at times, but he still definitely loves his mom and communicates with her, and so we're thankful that he is so resilient.
I would like to tell this story so that more people can become aware. I think a younger generation now, sort of millennials and under, are really starting to look at these old cases and go, wow, that was so fucked up. Like
it's awful.
It wouldn't happen today. That's sort of the thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if it would happen today. There's plenty of really messed up cases that are happening today, But my main goal is to get a younger audience, because I'm 49. Anybody who's like my age or older, they've sort of written these stories off as they're done, and we dealt with that in the 90s and blah, blah, blah. But younger people really want to discuss these cases and talk about the corruption and talk about why this happened. So I'm really trying to hit, a younger generation that can, talk about these cases and sort of, get the ball rolling again. And then you have all these like sort of social media investigators who are going out and finding new information. So I just think putting the information out there is super important.
We know what we know, and it's so hard that other people can't see what we know. And I think that the biggest thing when you were talking about a younger generation, what I have found is that even people my age, a lot of them, I'm 42, I'll be 43 this year. A lot of people in this age group don't even know the case. Exactly. A lot of them don't remember the media presentation of it. And I think that that's the biggest thing now. That age group didn't get inundated with all that negative publicity and all of the false information and misinformation, and it was all twisted in a certain way to make Darlie look guilty. And so that generation didn't get it. And so they're able to really look at the evidence and not the BS that was blown in our face, like the smoke screen. They didn't get that. So a lot of the people in these younger generations think Darlie's innocent, and they can see the actual evidence for what it is, not what somebody is telling you it should be.
Yeah, for sure. Well, she's working with the Innocence Project now. And I'm assuming, does she have a lawyer representing her outside of the Innocence Project, or just the Innocence Project?
We're actually really lucky to have Steve Cooper still working on the case. He was her original appellant attorney. And he's been pro bono for, I'm going to say 20 years now. And he still is he feels like an uncle to me, kind of like an extension of the family. He is still involved, and he still does whatever he can to help. Vanessa Podkins is really kind of running the appeal. She was able to join forces with the Dallas County Conviction Integrity Unit. And we are so lucky. We are so lucky that Dallas has that, because they're doing wonderful things for the legal system and really kind of restoring the faith in the district attorney's office that they do care about the actual justice, not just convictions. So they are also on board and working alongside the Innocence Project, hoping to really dig down into it and find the actual answers, some real meat that we clearly were never given. So hopefully that will lead to an exoneration in the next 6 months or less.
Do you mind if I stay in touch?
Absolutely. Go ahead and call me with any questions you have. I'm certainly not an expert in anything outside of knowing Darlie. I know Darlie very well, and that's about all I can be an expert to, but I have really tried to educate myself in pretty much every area of Darlie's case in regards to the expert witnesses and all the evidence. So I can I may not know the exact answer if you have questions, but I can definitely find it and give you at least what would be expected to be be the right answer.
That's amazing. So, thank you. I'm going to reach out to Darlie as well. So if you end up talking to her anytime, just let her know that I'm going to reach out via email. I already have her set up on my Securus and everything. So I really appreciate you. I know your kids just got home. I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for sharing your story with me. And I'll let you know when the episode comes out. Okay.
Yeah, that's exciting. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you looking into it. And like I said, just send me a text with anything you got, any questions, and I'm glad to help.
Okay. Thank you so much, Danelle, and I'll talk to you soon.
You're welcome. Okay. All right, Mel. Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I'd love to know your thoughts about what you've heard so far. Like I've said before, this is just the tip of the iceberg, and I plan to open this wound and shine some sunlight on it. I want to believe that our justice system gets it right most of the time. But when there's an inkling they might not have, and there's a mother sitting on death row, I think it's important we get to the bottom of the story and absolutely make sure that the jury got it right. If you like my work, please continue to support Grab Bag Collab, and please head on over to Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts to rate, review, subscribe, and share. Your support makes it possible for me and the Grab Bag team to continue to tell these important stories, so thank you. The In Between podcast is written, edited, and hosted by me, Mel Barrett, and is a production of Ruby Grace Productions. Thanks to Amber Hunt for editorial guidance, as well as the rest of the team at Grab Bag Collab, Amanda Rossman and Daisy Egan, for their support and guidance. If you want to binge great content, head on over to grabbagcollab.com and drop $5 for a membership. You won't be sorry. Follow the In Between podcast on Blue Sky, Facebook, and YouTube at In Between Pod, and on Instagram at the In Between Pod Official. On TikTok, you can follow me at Jack of All Trades DC. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
I was impressed with that interview. I was impressed with the In Between podcast. The host, I like the way that she wants to look into this case. Hopefully she'll be level-headed if she, if she feels like she's innocent. But, Danelle did very well on this one. She's getting her point across a lot better. The trauma of just it happening. Let's take the conviction out of the equation. For Danelle at 13 years old, the way she explains what she went through, dealing with the deaths of her nephews and how it happened and how she was told, by her mother, that's heartbreaking. There's nothing funny about it. There's no kind of joke that can be made about the trauma that she suffered because of this crime. Not to me. I think it was a very interesting interview because she gave us a perspective of how it affected her through the years. But there was a couple times where she's not out and out lying at all. This is a very good interview. Very good. Very well done. But it doesn't make Darlie innocent.